Hey guys, this is Dave, and today we're going to be checking out a couple of different things. I have one of Fiio's newer releases. This is the K13 R2R. It is a desktop DAC amp, and of course, as the name implies, instead of it implementing your typical Delta Sigma DAC configuration, it uses an R2R configuration. So it uses a resistor ladder to convert the digital audio signal to an analog signal. And then I also want to briefly talk about 64 Audio's Aspire 1 IEM, which is their entry-level IEM from the Aspire series. So I have a lot of information I want to try and cover in today's video. So of course, my goal is to cover as much information as I can, as quickly as I can. So let's get started. Okay, we'll go ahead and talk about the K13 R2R first. So this is everything that you get in the box. You have a remote, a power cable, which is plugged in so you can't see it, a USB cable, and a headphone adapter. And I actually feel like they've priced this pretty competitively at $320, which again, considering what this has to offer, not only in terms of the implementation of R2R processing, but also in terms of just the features, specifications, the power output, and just its general sound performance. I just believe it's actually a pretty solid package that they've put together here. Plus, as you can see, the overall design and build quality is really quite good. I love how they've added this window on top, and I think they refer to that as a skylight. And also you can see that the internals are lit by an LED, as are the volume and menu knobs in the front. So let's go ahead and talk about that. We'll cover the outside of the unit first, and then we'll move to the internals. So on the front, you can see they also, again, they've got the volume and menu knobs. They've also got an LCD display and both a 4.4 balanced and 6.35 single-ended headphone output. On the side over here, you can't see it, but there is an extra USB Type-C input. Then on the back, you've got two types of analog outputs, a pair of XLR balanced outputs, and two pairs of RCAs. You then have your coaxial, optical, and USB Type-C digital inputs, a Bluetooth antenna, AC and DC power inputs, and a toggle and a power switch. It can decode up to 32-bit PCM and DSD256. And again, this is not your typical Delta Sigma DAC amp with a DAC chip, but instead it implements an R2R structure which uses a resistor ladder, and it's a proper, fully differential, true 24-bit R2R resistor array setup with a fully balanced amp section that can produce up to 2.4 watts of power. So that's a pretty impressive amount of power output, and it uses dual OPA 1642 chips with dual TPA 612s. So they're using some pretty decent amp components as well. The internal menu is accessible by pressing the menu knob on the front, and then you can make your selections by rotating and pressing the menu knob. Another cool feature is that the K13 is compatible with the Fiio Control app, and then within the app itself, of course, you can update the firmware, choose your inputs, change the color of the LED lights, and access an EQ, plus more. So it just gives you another added level of flexibility. And then of course, again, this does offer Bluetooth connectivity if that's your thing. It can decode all of your basic codecs like SBC, AAC, and LDAC. So those are just your basic features. But in terms of drivability, and I'm just gonna jump right into sound here. In terms of drivability, you're going to get up to 2.4 watts of power out of the 4.4 balanced output, 1.2 watts out of the 6.35, and that is with a 32 ohm load. And then with a 300 ohm load, the 4.4 output will give you 600 milliwatts of power, and that was more than enough to power my HD 800S. Now, of course, compared with the 8 watts of power that the K19 might give you, or the 6 watts of power from the DNA Alpha Pro, that may not seem like a lot, but believe me, 2 to 3 watts is plenty of power, and this is not going to have any issues pushing pretty much most headphones out there, unless you have something like the Sysvara, again, you're not going to have any issues pushing most common headphones. And another thing that I should point out is that the K11 R2R, that gives you 1.3 watts. So you are jumping up quite a bit in terms of power output with the K13 R2R. Now, I will say, I don't think this is going to be able to compete maybe with a fully discrete amplifier, even something like the Fiio K15. But that said, it's certainly no slouch. And unless I'm doing like a direct side-by-side comparison in isolation with even some of my planar sets, I have to say the K13 R2R did an impressive job at providing a pretty authoritative bass experience. And I guess I'll just go ahead and take this opportunity to segue right into sound. So one of the things that drew me to the R2R sound years ago was how different it was in its overall presentation when compared with your standard Delta Sigma type of sound. And hey, I love the Delta Sigma sound. I mean, almost all of my reference amps use that. And in a sense, I guess it's kind of like choosing between a tube amp and a solid state amp. Essentially, you have two different flavors, and obviously the tube sound is generally warmer, richer, more analog-y sounding, I guess you could say, and the Delta Sigma is more linear. Maybe you could call it more clinical or reference. So it's kind of the same with the R2R sound. It's going to have maybe some of those same types of attributes that you might expect with a tube amp. Not that it's the same, it's not. They are still two pretty distinct types of presentations, but you will often hear people use the same types of descriptors when referring to R2R sound that you might associate with a tube amp presentation. So the R2R compared with a Delta Sigma presentation, the R2R is going to lean more warm. It might be a little softer in the top part of its presentation and have a more analog type of sound and less analytical than a Delta Sigma DAC. And I will tell you right now, that was my experience with the K13 R2R. To me, it does fall into the less analytical category and into the more analog category. So to me, when I was comparing the K13 R2R to my other Delta Sigma DACs, desktop DAC amps, all-in-ones, my DAPs, dongles, the K13 R2R did have that distinct R2R presentation. So with certain tracks where I might be accustomed to hearing a little more detail and a little more, I guess, incisiveness, instead sounded maybe a little more rich and a little sweeter, a little fuller, and still reasonably detailed, but just not as detailed as I was used to getting out of, again, say the K15 or something like even the Dathonry Clarinet Pro. And I should clarify, if I was just doing casual listening with tracks that I'm maybe not as familiar with, there was certainly enough detail to keep me happy and satisfied for the most part. And in isolation, it was resolving enough and detailed enough so that I could totally enjoy my music. And it wasn't until I started really doing side-by-side comparisons that I actually started to notice the differences in resolution between the two types of presentations. And the thing is that there is still plenty of enjoyment to be had with the other unique attributes that come with that R2R sound. Again, just like there is with a good tube presentation. And I think the thing that struck me the most about the K13 R2R was its mid-range. The vocals just had a nice, really sweet tone and a naturalness. And I guess, again, something I could only describe as sounding maybe more analog or warm sounding. At least, again, that's how I hear it. And it's certainly unique to not only to this device, but other R2R devices I've experienced over the years, like the Gustard R26, the Hibby RS2, or the Hibby FC6, for example. And I think another way I might describe the R2R presentation would be that I guess maybe it's not soft, but it's certainly non-aggressive. So if you have recordings that might have an edge, this seemed seems to take some of that edge off, and it's just a little more polite, I guess you could say. Now, another thing that I was impressed by with the K13 R2R was its staging and its forward depth and layering. So on one hand, from a technical perspective, while it's maybe not the most resolving or detailed, there is something to be said about its ability to immerse the listener. And it's not so much that it offers a wide soundstage necessarily, but it does have really good forward depth and forward layering. So vocals are right in front where they should be, front and center, and everything else kind of sits behind the vocals. And you also have that same kind of layering with instruments. So there's a sense of space between the instruments, not just from left to right, but also from front to back. So it gives you this nice dimensional presentation that, again, it just made me feel a little more immersed in the music. Now, as far as comparisons go, it is a little tough because basically all of my devices, with the exception again of the Hibi FC6, are Delta Sigma devices. And this does actually have a very similar presentation to the Hibi FC6, but of course this brings way more power to the table. So while the FC6 is excellent with IEMs, this is going to be able to handle basically any full-size headphone that you can throw at it, and it just handles it a little better with a little more authority. But as I said earlier, there are distinct differences between the R2R sound and my other Delta Sigma devices. Those devices are going to sound a little more analytical, maybe a little more detailed, a little more linear, while this is going to be, again, a little softer and just a little more polite. It's going to bring more naturalness and I guess you could say physicality, only what I can describe as a more analog type of presentation. And then of course I also tested for background noise using my 2020 Andromedas, and I did hear a little bit of hiss, but only in low gain. And it was so slight that it wasn't even noticeable during playback. And with most of my other IEMs, it was actually not even noticeable at all. It was completely noise-free. So unless you have some really sensitive IEMs or you're just extremely sensitive to that, it's not even something to concern yourself with. And as for whether or not this gets my recommendation, as R2R devices go, I actually feel like the K13 R2R brings a lot to the table in terms of value, because most other R2R DACs that I've owned are, first of all, they're more expensive. Even the Hibi FC6 comes in at what, $300, and I don't even know if it's still available. And obviously you're gonna get way more in terms of features and power output with the K13 R2R over something like the FC6. And yes, there is the Fiio K13 R2R, which I have not heard, so I can't really speak on how they would compare. Hi-Fi Man does also have the EF 499, which is, I think, also around $300. I have listened to that, but I don't own it, and I didn't have it, so I couldn't really do a side-by-side comparison. I do know it does have more power, but it does not have a screen, and I don't think it has Bluetooth. It does have an Ethernet port for streaming. And again, I couldn't really compare it directly with the K13 R2R. However, I can tell you from what I remember that its extra power output did seem to help with bass, and it just gave it a greater sense of dynamics, and the bass did sound a little more controlled and I guess authoritative. That said, again, as R2R devices go, I do feel like this really does give me that R2R experience. And then when you consider its power output, its versatility as far as connection options, the display, plus some of the internal features and components that, and I didn't even get into the capacitors and the power supply, but when you take all of that into consideration, I really do feel like this brings a lot of value to the table. Again, especially if you are in the market or looking for a basic R2R desktop experience. Okay, I know this video is already going long, but we need to go ahead and move on. We have one more thing to check out, and of course that is the 64 Audio Aspire 1. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Okay, so this is the 64 Audio Aspire 1, and I actually do have a full review on my Audio in Reviews channel where I talk about my experience using this both at home and on stage. And the Aspire series IEMs are actually marketed as being developed and designed primarily for stage use. But again, in that video, I also talk about my home use as well, and that's kind of how I'm going to approach this review. But anyways, there are a total of 4 IEMs in the Aspire series, this being the entry level or the least expensive of the 4. And they've priced this one at $350. It uses a single dynamic driver. The design is decent, it's good, it's pretty simple, but it's clean. This is the same design that they've used on the other IEMs in the series. Those just have different color options or different color faceplates. The overall build and cable are also identical with the rest of the Aspire lineup. The IEMs themselves do feel robust, they're comfortable, they're holding up good for me so far on stage. I've used them quite a bit. The cable has been holding up on stage as well, so the cable is certainly getting the job done, although I guess there are better cables out there at this price point. But again, for stage use, it's perfectly fine, it's getting the job done. But how does it sound? Well, it does have a V-shaped presentation, and its overall presentation is more bass focused. That was the first thing that jumped out at me when I was doing my initial testing. And for home use, this type of presentation isn't necessarily something that I normally would gravitate towards. I usually prefer a more warm, neutral presentation. So this is a little outside of my preference. It is certainly fun and it's engaging, but it's just not something I'm going to reach for very often. Some of my current favorites, roughly in this price range, are the Softears Volume S, the Studio 4, the Dunu DaVinci, the Elysian Pilgrim, and while each of those do have their own little, I guess, special attributes and differences, they all just come a little closer to my preference. So again, we have a pretty significant bass boost with the Aspire 1, and it is north of my tuning preference. That said, it does bring good bass dynamics and punch to the table and really good bass extension as well. So in terms of bass quantity, there is a lot of bass, but the bass quality is quite good. The lower mids do take a little bit of a hit in terms of clarity because there is a little bit of bass bleed, but at the same time, that extra mid bass and that low mid energy does bring some warmth and richness to male vocals, which with certain tracks, I guess, or with certain genres, that can be a good trade-off. And that also does help with, again, it adds some mid-bass kick, impact, and punch as well. So as far as the mid-range, some of the other IEMs that I've got here, the Volume S, Pilgrim, they do offer more in terms of mid-range clarity. However, I do still feel like this is giving me enough detail to keep me satisfied. And I think the extra upper mid-range energy is helping with that. Plus, you do also have a pretty significant amount of treble energy as well, since this is a V-shaped presentation, and that certainly does help bring more clarity to its overall presentation. Vocals also have good clarity and sound natural. I do think that if they had maybe relaxed the bass a little bit, that may have given vocals a little more room to breathe. But generally speaking, for this tuning style, I do get the sense that vocals maintain a good center focus for the most part. So they are cutting through enough, but again, I feel like they're competing with the bass a little bit. As for the treble, there wasn't really anything that sounded unnatural to me. For the most part, everything that lands in the treble and upper treble sounds natural or just correct. I guess I would just describe it as kind of safe, which is fine for this price point. I have no problem with that. I would consider the treble to be a little boosted, again, what you might expect with a V-shaped approach. And because of that, it does have a little bit of an edge to it. So there is the potential for this to become a little fatiguing. There's also sufficient upper treble. So of course that brings some airiness to the presentation. Technical performance is also good. It's not the best at this price point, but certainly not the worst. I don't think it's going to be able to compete with the Studio 4 or Volume S or Pilgrim, but it does have adequate levels of of detail. The imaging, separation, layering are also good enough to give me a sense of dimension. And again, I do feel like it immersed me fairly well into the music. So again, from a home use or personal listening perspective, typically, again, this is not a tuning style that I would gravitate towards. And that actually applies to stage use as well. I prefer something a little more neutral. That said, it seems like every musician that I know, with the exception of maybe a few, they seem to gravitate towards IEMs with a V-shaped signature like this. And I can understand how some might find this type of presentation to be attractive because it does bring a little more excitement to the stage experience. It can also be, again, it can engage the musician a little more. And this bassier tuning style can especially be attractive to drummers like myself and or bass players. And again, most musicians are not audiophiles, at least not here in the US. And many of them don't even really have, I guess, a point of comparison or reference. So to them, this sounds great. And even for me, having that point of reference, I do still think this IEM works good for stage use on drums. But when I compare this, again, with some of my other IEMs that I'm used to using on stage within this price range, again, Volume S, Studio 4, those are just more to my liking. Plus, they also bring better technical performance to the table, which for me is very important for stage use. Now, as for whether or not I would recommend this to a fellow musician, while this may not be my top recommendation, because I can think of at least 7 or 8 other sets that I'm more likely to recommend for stage use at this price point or even less. Again, that said, I don't have any doubt that most musicians would be perfectly happy with a set. Reason being is because it does have a pretty straightforward V-shaped tuning. Again, it makes a stage experience fun and engaging. The bass performance is actually quite good with this set, and that would appeal again probably to drummers and bassists. Its technical performance is maybe about average, but you're still going to get decent separation and clarity. And again, this is their entry-level set. And I have not heard the other IEMs in the Aspire lineup, but my guess is that those are going to offer a more elevated experience as you move up the Aspire series. Again, this is their entry-level set. So you may just need to temper your expectations accordingly. That said, this is 64 audio we're talking about, and this is what they do. So yes, while this is their entry-level set, I do feel like it's maybe not the best out there, but it is certainly competent. And again, from a stage use perspective, as far as its build quality, the isolation, comfort, its ability to take a beating on stage, which is actually huge, I think this set does meet a lot of those specific requirements. Again, from a home use perspective, though, it's not necessarily something that I would typically reach for. For stage use, I think it would be a perfectly fine set. Anyways, I think that does it for this video. If you are new to the Gazaudio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please like this video, please share this video, please comment on this video. I hope you have an awesome day.